Walking away from this video, you are going to feel so much better about your chances of living a long and healthy life. And I really wanted to make this video because I feel like so much of the longevity advice out there is just completely overwhelming and complex. It's all about cold plunges and peptide injections and expensive supplements and monitoring your glucose and your sleep 24 hours a day. Meanwhile, I have this secret theory that a lot of the people giving this kind of advice are actually running on 5 hours of sleep and a cortisol cocktail. So if their advice that they're giving that you're hearing is not realistic for you, that's actually good news, because according to the real science, most of what's going to help you live a long and healthy life is actually quite simple and attainable. And so today I'm gifting you the lazy person's guide to longevity that is more effective than a lot of this other advice. And we're gonna build it out like a pyramid. So we're gonna start with the base of the pyramid, the absolute foundation, and then we're gonna work our way up the pyramid in terms of things that you can add on. And only at that very top, that step number 5, are when we're gonna get to those things that are about optimization, that are those things that you've probably heard, the supplements, the wearables, the complicated stuff. There can be a role for that, but you have to understand we have to start with the basics first. And if you like the vibe of this video, the vibe of attainable things that you can do for your health, cheap things that you can do for your health, please follow along and subscribe. I am an internal medicine doctor. My whole channel is talking about my personal experience and things that you can do that are just about no nonsense wellness. Nothing complicated, nothing too much, but always science-backed. So if you want to live longer but not waste your time and not spend a ton of money on complicated things, this video is for you. Let's get into it. First of all, level 1 of the pyramid is that we have to do everything we can, everything in our power to avoid preventable death. So it's estimated that about 60% of all deaths are preventable. And so we have to take these common sense approaches to make sure that we're doing everything we can in the name of prevention. According to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, the 5 leading causes of preventable death are heart disease, cancer, strokes, lung disease, and accidental injury, things like car crashes and other kind of accidental deaths. So we're gonna get more into some of the diet, exercise, lifestyle things that you can do to prevent a lot of these chronic diseases. But let's talk about really, really basic steps first. 1, don't drink and drive. Don't text and drive. Don't watch TV or like a YouTube video on your phone while you're driving. Wear a seatbelt. Even in an Uber, they exist for a reason. There is so much evidence that says they actually help save lives. And in general, just practice cautious defensive driving. The best offense is a good defense. You may have heard that said before. Obviously, you can't control what other people are doing on the road, but you have to be aware that some people are not going to be driving safely, and you have to be defensive about that. You have to do everything you can do to be safe. In addition to that, go to the doctor, get a physical, get your blood work done, get your vital signs taken, know what your risk factors are. It's estimated that 50% of people living in the United States have high blood pressure, and many of these have no idea that they have it. But it is a huge risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Your doctor can also order regular cancer screenings. You have to get this. Cancer, again, is one of the 5 most common preventable deaths. This includes mammograms for breast cancer, pap smears for cervical cancer. There's also colon cancer screening, and the age to start that has just been lowered to 45 from 50 because we're seeing an increased incidence in colon cancer in younger people. And if you smoke, you may be eligible for lung cancer screening, or if you know someone who smokes, pass this on. This is really important to know about, that this is a thing for people who smoke. And that leads me to my next point. Don't smoke. At this point, we know that it will decrease your lifespan. Just don't do it, ever. Okay, so let's move on from that base of the pyramid, which is just taking those practical steps to prevent early death. Let's move on to the second tier, which is the most underrated pillar in all of longevity and wellness, and that is sleep. I really believe that if you fix one thing from this video, aside from like going to the doctor, not smoking, not texting and driving, make sleep your priority. It is not just about rest. It's not just about feeling good. It's actually repair. It is the process by which your body repairs and heals itself. It's actually during sleep that your body clears beta amyloid, which is the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. So it's no surprise that more sleep is associated with a decreased risk for developing dementia or cognitive dysfunction. And it doesn't stop there. Sleep can also affect your insulin sensitivity, your cardiovascular risk, and your risk for cancer. There was actually a study published back in 2010 in the Sleep Journal that found that adults who got less than 6 hours of sleep over the long term had a 12% increased risk for all-cause mortality. That's dying from any cause. And many, many other studies have found that poor sleep, generally less than 6 hours a night, is associated with a slew of health problems, things like impaired glucose control, impaired immune function, and then things like chronic diseases, cancer, heart disease, dementia, like I mentioned. I also think that really prioritizing your sleep helps you accomplish the next things that we'll talk about on the tier, because you're more likely to stick to a movement routine. You're more likely to make healthy dietary choices if you feel rested. Once we're sleep deprived, our decision making goes down the drain, and our willpower to do things that we know are going to actually be good for us also gets completely wiped. Simple tips that will help your sleep. Number one, go to bed and wake up at the same time every night. I know this is hard, but this is probably, for me, it's the most important thing. And it's easier said than done because I live in a new city. I've been wanting to meet people. I'm newly single, so I'm trying to go out. But it is the most important thing that's going to help your sleep. Trying to sleep in a cool, dark bedroom really helps. 67 degrees Fahrenheit is usually perfect. Cutting screens 60 minutes before bed, huge help. Also cutting out alcohol before bed because it really will fuck with your sleep. A lot of people like to use wearables for sleep, like the Oura Ring. People rave about it. For me, it is not personally my thing. It makes me like obsess over sleep, worry about it more. And one of the worst things that you can do for your sleep is put too much pressure on it and have too much anxiety about it. That's a recipe for sleeping poorly. So I avoid those, but you just have to know yourself. If you think it's something that may help you and you can afford it, for sure, give it a try. I'll talk a little bit more about the devices and all that realm at the end of the video in level 5 of the pyramid. But for now, let's move on to level 3 of the Lazy Guide to Longevity pyramid, and that is going to be exercise. If I told you that there was a pill that could reduce your risk of death from any cause by 50%, almost everyone would want to take it. But that pill exists, and it is called exercise. And I get it. A lot of people hear the word exercise and they immediately think CrossFit or waking up at 5 a.m. to go do sprints in the rain, and they say, hell no. I get it. But again, there is good news for people who are not about that life. It can be simple and easier than you think, I promise. Obviously, I can't lie to you. Your level of fitness, your level of cardiovascular fitness, what you're actually able to do with your body does influence your chances of living longer. And it influences it by a lot. In fact, there was a study back in 2018 that was published in JAMA that looked at stratifications of physical ability, physical fitness ability, and looked at their long-term risk for mortality. And not surprisingly, you saw that the people with the lowest physical fitness were at the higher risk for mortality, and the lowest risk for mortality over a 10-year period were people who had elite physical fitness. Which is not everyone. That's like 5% of the population, but you get the trend. And what I really like about this study and what it showed is that the biggest difference comes from when you go from a low level of physical fitness to a just below average level of physical fitness. That difference is associated with a 50% reduction in mortality. And then if you go from a low physical fitness to a slightly above average physical fitness, this is not to the elite level, this is just slightly above average, your mortality risk decreases by 60 to 70%. Now, this particular study, and I'll put the link down below in the comments if you want to take a look at it, emphasizes the importance of cardiovascular fitness. But strength training, we know from so many other studies, is also key to longevity. And that's because sarcopenia, which is muscle loss, is a big predictor of mortality. So building and maintaining muscle is hugely important when you're young, and definitely more and more important as you get older. So in more concrete terms, what does this look like on, let's say, a weekly basis? What is your routine for movement that is going to maximize your longevity? Okay, so number one, you need to get at least 150 minutes of what we call zone 2 exercise each week. Ideally more. If you can get 200 minutes, that's great. What is zone 2 exercise? This is where you're moving and you're getting your heart rate to about 60 to 70% of its maximum. You can talk in full sentences, but you can't sing, for example. So it's great to do with someone else. This would be like a brisk walk or maybe like a light jog. But again, it doesn't have to be any of these things. It just has to be what you like doing. It could be dancing at the club. And the longer you can do it for, the better. So if you can get in like a 45 or 60-minute session, that's going to be incredible. But really aim for that like minimum 150 minutes per week. And then make sure you're doing some form of strength training each week. 2 times a week is the minimum, maybe 3. I wouldn't do much more than that. It doesn't have to be going to the gym and lifting heavy weights. It can be Pilates. It can be doing resistance band exercises at home. You can use YouTube videos for this. It does not have to be complicated, just something that is doing resistance or strength training. And then lastly, you may not all love this, but if you want to add the cherry on top, add in some HIIT training. This is high intensity interval training. So what this means is that you are pushing yourself to almost your maximum for a short period of time and then resting. So you want to get to like 85 to 95% of your max heart rate, and then you stop and you rest completely. This really pushes your heart and lungs to their absolute maximum, and it is the most efficient way to increase your VO2, which is the maximum amount of oxygen that your body can use during exercise. VO2 is a good predictor of longevity. So the higher your VO2, the higher your chances of living a longer life. Zone 2 exercise absolutely helps it, especially when you're consistent, but HIIT will help it even a little bit more. The one thing I'll say about HIIT, do not do it every day. You just need 1 to 2 times a week, 2 times most, and then you're gonna get that benefit. It's not meant to be done every day. 1 to 2 times a week max is beneficial. Don't do more than that. The bulk of your exercise should actually be that zone 2 exercise that we talked about. And of course, with all of these things, with movement in general, make sure you're doing it consistently over time. We want any movement practice to be something that you can stick to, something that you can do consistently. Because when you stop training, your VO2 will go down. And so I always say it's better to start slow and actually work up to something that you can sustain instead of trying to go from 0 to 100 and then realizing like, I can't do this long term, and then you quit completely. Okay, let's move on to step 4 of the pyramid. We're almost to the top. We're gonna get there in a second, but first we have to talk about nutrition. Now, please be aware, you do not have to have a perfect diet. You do not have to eat perfectly clean all the time, but you do have to stop eating like an unsupervised 12-year-old. Sorry, I don't mean to be offensive like that. 12-year-olds do have a lot of good taste in food, but you just can't eat like that all the time. So when researchers look at the dietary patterns that are associated with longevity, so if they look at people who live really long lives and they say, what have they been eating? Obviously, these are observational. It's really hard to do experimental versions of this over the course of a lifetime. But these observational studies do show that the same dietary trends and patterns do keep showing up again and again and again. So these are the things that you want to keep in mind when you are thinking about eating for longevity. Number 1, eat more plants, because the single most consistent dietary predictor of longevity is whole plant foods. So this isn't just going to include leaves like lettuces. Obviously, all vegetables, fruits, berries, nuts, legumes, beans, whole grains, you name it. Again, the studies are filled with a lot of observational evidence that correlates plant-based diets with longevity, but the mechanisms also make sense because we know that plant-based foods are very high in fiber and antioxidants, much more than meat-based foods. And those things are absolutely good for our health and they promote longevity. The second big pillar or takeaway is to limit animal products. You don't have to cut them out completely, but the research does show that it's best to just eat less of them. And I would say the second part of that is actually just choosing better when you do decide to eat animal products, because some of them have actually been found to be very detrimental to health. For example, there was this big meta-analysis published in the BMJ in 2020 that found that a higher intake of red and processed meat was associated with an increased risk of chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease. Instead, you can try eating fish. These are going to be high, especially the fatty fish like salmon and sardines, are going to be high in omega-3 fatty acids, which we know are health promoting. So eating fish may actually be the only animal product that may have a positive effect on health. You can also choose poultry over red meat. That's not to say that poultry is necessarily health promoting and good for you, but it is going to be better than red meat. And then of course, things like eggs and dairy in moderation. The thing is, you should think of animal products like a condiment to what you're eating, not the main dish, not what should build like the most foundational part of your meal. It should be like in the outskirts, like the condiment, the extra little treat. And then the third most important pillar here is going to be avoiding ultra processed foods and added sugar. So this is probably the number one killer in our modern food environment. And it's going to include things like packaged cookies and chips, fast food, sugary cereals, soda. There was actually this huge study published again in the BMJ in 2019 that had a cohort of 44,000 people. And they found that for every 10% increase in the consumption of processed foods, there was a 14% increase in all-cause mortality. So the bottom line here is basically just to eat foods that your great-grandmother would recognize. A couple other more fine-tuning tips that are still very important: really prioritize protein, especially as you age, especially if you are doing strength training and trying to build your muscle. A really good rule of thumb is trying to get 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. And again, this is really important because it's going to help prevent sarcopenia, which is that state of muscle loss, which is an independent predictor for mortality. And when I tell people about this, when I talk to patients about this, they often hear, oh, I need to eat more protein. That means I need to eat more meat. No, plant-based sources of protein are actually far superior. They're going to have fiber and antioxidants, which meat doesn't have. Legumes, beans, tofu, quinoa, all excellent sources of protein. And I promise you, it is more than reasonable to get sufficient protein from a totally vegan diet. Again, not saying you have to be vegan, but it's possible. You don't have to be afraid of getting your protein from vegetable-based sources. Another little tip is to eat in a way that minimizes glucose spikes, because some studies have shown that glucose spikes, like when your blood sugar goes up and then down and up and then down, this is associated with an increased risk for chronic diseases and poor health outcomes. So to do that, make sure you're prioritizing fiber in every meal. Fiber is just so important, but if you're really focusing on eating mostly plants, you will probably meet your needs without having to be really diligent in counting your fiber. And then making sure during your meals, you're also combining your carbs, which ideally are good carbs, like whole grains instead of refined carbs like white bread and plain pasta and sugary cereals. You want to be combining your carbohydrates with fat and protein. That's also going to help make your blood sugar really steady and even and avoid those spikes. And lastly, limit alcohol. I cannot bullshit you on this. We used to say that probably a little bit of alcohol is actually good for you, like a glass of wine with dinner. That is not felt to be, or is that not, that's not shown to be true anymore. And so the less you can drink, the better. I get that alcohol is a big part of a lot of our lives. I love a cold beer on a summer day too. I get it, but we have to be mindful that we're not overdoing it. And we have to remember there's no known safe limit. And another thing is just hydrate properly. Don't drink juice, don't drink soda. Drink water. You can add a little lemon to it to romanticize it a bit, but water should be your go-to. All right, and with that, we have reached level 5, the tip of the pyramid. This is what I like to call the optimization category. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about is supplements in this particular section. But you need to think of this as like bonus mode. If you're not doing 1 through 4, if you haven't frankly mastered 1 through 4, skip this. This isn't for you. But if you have a really strong foundation, if you are doing the lifestyle things and you really want to reach the next step and try something that may help you live better longer, these are the things I would recommend. Let's start with the supplements. And first, I would actually interject and say that if you're thinking of taking supplements, I would always take them in concert with a doctor or other healthcare professional. At least have them know what you're taking, because every person is different. Other people taking certain medications, these may have interactions. It's just really important that your doctor knows what you're taking, and you should always ask your doctor advice before starting something. So number 1 to consider would actually be creatine. It's not just for bodybuilders in the gym. There is tons of evidence that shows that it's really important for muscle health, for strength, for preventing sarcopenia, which I have mentioned multiple times. We need to avoid sarcopenia to promote longevity. Also helps with brain functioning, cognitive functioning. The dose of this is usually between 3 to 5 grams per day. I personally take it I've been doing a lot of strength training in the gym, so I think it's really important to supplement with creatine. And then it also has this benefit that it may promote longevity if taken in the long term. The next supplement I would touch on is vitamin D, specifically vitamin D3. It improves immune function, bone health, of course, and it's especially important if you get really little sun exposure. So people, especially who are darker skinned and are living in a place where they may not get a lot of exposure to the sun, or they spend most of their time indoors, those are the people at highest risk for vitamin D deficiency. But it is actually very common in our population to have vitamin D deficiency. I myself have had it and I supplemented. And that's the key thing. It's really important to know your starting level, which is another reason you need to see a doctor about this and not just start taking it on your own, because you want to target a specific level of vitamin D in your blood. Between 30 and 50 is usually the rule of thumb. I was way below that, and then with supplementation, I got up there. So I'm doing much better. But again, you need to be scientific about it. You need to know your starting levels and then monitor how you're doing. And I mentioned vitamin D, not because I think everyone on the planet should take it. There's no evidence that people who are not deficient in vitamin D should take vitamin D. In fact, too high levels can be toxic. But for people who are deficient and actually supplement, that probably is associated with a mortality reduction or an increase in longevity. Next, I would think about magnesium, preferably glycinate or citrate. Magnesium is important in over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. It can support sleep, it can support stress, it can help glucose control even. I like to use Calm. It's a magnesium powder that you can mix in water. It actually tastes kind of good. I think I get the raspberry lemon flavor, and I can link it down below. But I like to put that in my water before bed at night, and it does help me calm down and get ready for sleep. And there is, an idea that because it just helps so many functions in the body, especially if you aren't getting it from your diet, it can be a huge boost to longevity. And then the other one I would say would be omega-3 fatty acids. Again, these can come from fatty fish like salmon and sardines, and also algae. But a lot of people don't get enough of that in their diet. So if you're not consuming these foods, it may be worth it to take a supplement version of this. There's two types of omega-3 fatty acid, the EPAs and the DHAs. Both are important. And there was also even a trial, it was called the VITAL trial, that found that people who took these supplements had a lower risk of cardiovascular disease down the line, especially in people who had a low fish intake, which makes sense. And then there is a whole world of supplements that you may have heard of that I think are really experimental. They are not ready for prime time. And they've evolved a lot. Like over the past 5 years, I've seen these kind of like biohacker bros really change their tune a lot on what they're taking. These are things like Metformin, Rapamycin. The new one is like microdosing GLP-1s actually. Other ones are resveratrol, which is actually kind of falling out of favor now. NMN or NAD plus boosters. The thing is, a lot of the trials that have shown these really exciting benefits of all of these medications or supplements have usually been done in mice. We don't have long-term human trials yet, and that's going to be something that we need before we can widely recommend them. Obviously, if you're really interested, you're doing everything else, you've already mastered all the supplements I've talked about, and you really just want to try to be experimental and try the next thing, please do it in concert with a doctor. Anything that you're taking, especially these, I would see a doctor. There are more and more doctors that are specializing or taking a special interest in longevity medicine, so that could be worth, seeking out one of those. But don't just go taking this on your own, please. And then let's briefly talk a little bit about devices. One of the big ones that you'll hear longevity medicine enthusiasts talk about is continuous glucose monitors. And these are devices that you can wear, and it literally just monitors your glucose continuously. So you can track what your glucose looks like over a 24-hour period, a week period, whatever. The idea is, as we said before, is we want our glucose levels to be really consistent, as stable as possible. We don't want spikes up and down, because that's been linked to poor health outcomes. So the idea is you could wear a CGM to see what type of foods, exercise, sleep patterns keep your glucose levels the most consistent. But I don't necessarily think that you need it, because if you're following all of the practices we talked about, it's a pretty good indicator that your glucose levels are going to be pretty stable. But again, this is for someone who wants to get to the next level, who likes that tech aspect of it. could be a good idea. I think it would be fun. I haven't personally done it yet, but I do think it would be interesting. Another device that a lot of people get really into are sleep trackers, like the Oura Ring, like I mentioned before. Can be a good option if you think it's going to provide valuable insight into how you're sleeping and then actionable things that you can do to help your sleep and improve your sleep quality. Totally fair, but beware that there are studies that do indicate that sometimes wearing sleep trackers can increase sleep anxiety and put too much pressure on sleep. And that is the number one thing that you don't want, because that is a predictor for insomnia. That happened to me actually when I tried to use a sleep app like 10 years ago. It just made my anxiety and all the pressure around sleep so much worse, and it gave me insomnia. So I avoid it, but there's people who do great with it. And if you want to give it a try, if you think it would be fun, it could be worth it. Another little device that I will recommend is a mindfulness or meditation app. I use Open. I love it. I am obsessed. Meditation and controlling stress is huge. It will lower chronic inflammation, reduce your cortisol levels. You have got to figure out a way to live most of the time without stress. We did not evolve to live with chronic stress. And so whatever you need to do to manage those levels, absolutely important. And so I think that if you are a fan of meditation apps, this can be a great option. Again, I cannot recommend Open enough. And I've been to their studio in LA, in Venice, and their breathwork classes are just mind-blowing. And then one other thing that I would say I've gotten into recently, because I personally like it, even though I would say the evidence is still early and not totally conclusive, is infrared sauna and cold exposures. So I actually have been going to a place where they have contrast therapy. So you go back and forth between the infrared sauna and the cold exposure, the cold ice bath. But even a cold shower will help, or changing the temperature of your shower will help. There is some evidence that this helps with cellular repair and may promote longevity. But again, it's too early to say. Only do it if you think it feels good and if you want to try it. But like I said, we're at step 5 here. This is just like the very tip of things that, like, if you want to try, knock yourself out. But all the other things of step 1 through 4 are going to be way more important. So the bottom line is, do not obsess over taking an NMN supplement and going to contrast therapy if you are still doom scrolling at 2 a.m. Get the basics down first, and then maybe start dipping your toe into this like level 5 optimization. And that's all I have for you today. We've gone through the 5 steps as promised of what I like to call the lazy girl's guide to longevity. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I actually love answering questions. Please do. I need new ideas for next videos. If you want me to go deeper on something like sleep, or even if you want to learn more about like that level 5, like the supplements and the devices, I can go into all of the data for that. It could be really fun. But just let me know what you want. And please, if you like this type of content, subscribe to my channel, give this video a like. It helps so much. And really, if this resonates with you, I would love to have you in my corner of the internet.